All right, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about my advanced focaccia tutorial. Now, there's nothing hard about this. I only call it advanced because we're going to get a little more precise with our measurements. We're going to have the process take a little bit longer to build more flavor and better texture in our dough. And we're going to use a few more specialized tools. So, I'll start by telling you everything you're going to need for this. You're going to need some flour, water, salt, and yeast. Those are the building blocks of any bread. Now, a couple things that I have here. Got a scale. This I use to mix up the dough a little bit. This is a Danish dough whisk. You don't need this. You could just use your hands. And as you'll see, I'm going to use my hands in part of it. It just sometimes can be nice to have. And then one of my great focaccia secrets is these here pans. These are from Lloyd's pans. And just like the non-stick, the smoothness, the crispiness of the crust you're going to get on the bottom from these are going to be great. So anyway, that's just a little overview of what we need. I'll talk more in depth about each thing as we go on. All right, so step one is we're going to Autolyse, I don't know how to pronounce that word, which is just mixing your flour and your water together. So we're just going to mix the flour and water together, and then you're going to let that sit for 20 or 30 minutes. You can go do something and then come back, and then we're going to add our salt and our yeast. All right, so let's add our water to our flour to start the Autolyse. I've got 675 grams of flour here. That could be all-purpose or it could be bread flour. I don't really care. We've got 500 grams of water. Let's just pour that in. Then I'm going to take my Danish dough whisk and we're just going to mix this until it's all incorporated. What we're trying to do here is just make sure all of the flour is getting wet and saturated with the water. And that causes some chemical reactions, that gluten starts forming. I hope you can see that. Producing this video by myself, so I don't have anyone behind the camera. I sort of scrape that flour off the edges there and just try to scoop it all up. And we're not trying to mix it or knead it here. We're just getting it so that we don't have any dry flour. And that's looking pretty good. I might just take a look, see, make sure there's no dry flour in there. We're going to cover that with a towel and let it rest for 20 to 30 minutes. Okay, now while that is autolysing, I don't know. We're going to talk about why I'm giving you the measurements in grams instead of cups or whatever. Just so the volume measurements, the cups, the tablespoons, all that, you know, they just tell you how much of something, but that's just not very good when you're doing things like flour because, you know, I could pack a thing of flour and maybe get, I don't know, how many grams in one cup, and maybe you could have like loosely sifted flour and get a different number of grams in your cup. So if we just measure things in weight, we're going to get the same amount every time, and that's going to let us get a more consistent final product. It's also helpful because I like to know in a pan like this, I want to put 600 grams of dough. So that's going to make the best size focaccia for me. So that way I can just do a recipe where I know I'm going to get 1,200 grams of dough, and I'll have 2 of these. So, you know, a scale like this, what's it cost you? 30 bucks. Now you could do this with cup measurements. It's just not going to be as accurate, and you're still going to get a great product. It's just not going to be as consistent, you know. But I'm going to say this, the scale, now this is my most used kitchen tool, because what are you doing with this? You're doing your bacon with this, you're weighing out your coffee, you're making your Chemex on this thing. You know, if you're maybe trying to watch your diet, you could measure out your portions of your food on that. You can look at the box of the cereal with the calories, and you could be like, oh, 100 grams of this is how many calories? You know, it's just, it's fun. It's a nice thing to have. So yeah, get one. Now also, while we're waiting for this, I'm going to talk a little bit about our salt and our yeast. So I got 20 grams here of kosher salt. You can use any kind of salt you want. Kosher is just what I tend to have in a big box lying around. And that's actually another good reason why you want to use a scale, is sometimes you'll see a recipe and it says, oh, a tablespoon of kosher salt, or a tablespoon of table salt or sea salt or something. And you know, every different salt has a different sort of size, which means maybe a tablespoon of one salt would be too much salt if you did a tablespoon of a different kind of salt. So with this, you can use whatever kind of salt you want, just 20 grams. It's going to be great. Here, I've got the yeast. Now this is instant yeast. I buy this in a big 1 pound brick. SAF is the brand, S-A-F. They have it at Whole Foods, they have it on Amazon. You buy it in a pound, it's $5. You put it in your fridge, and you'll never run out. I think the last time I bought some was 3 or 4 years ago. Because you see, I'm using, this is 1 gram. And that's hard to measure out on a scale like this. So this is the one thing I'll say, and this is pretty uniformly sized. So I'll say you could do a heaping 1/4 teaspoon. And you know, if you put a little more yeast in than that, it's going to take a little less time to bulk ferment. If you do a little less, it's going to take a little more time. It's not a big deal. We're using a very small amount of yeast here because what we're going for is a very long fermentation time, which is going to allow us to build a lot of flavor in our dough. The other nice thing about instant yeast is you don't have to activate it. You don't have to put it in water and stir it up and wait for it and get the water warm. You just mix this stuff right in, and it works every time. It may be a little harder to find. It's not in those packets like they have at the grocery store, you know. And if you're doing this and you don't have instant yeast, you can use the packets at the grocery store. Search for the conversion amount online. Search for how to put it in the water and get it proofing. I'm just saying, this is the advanced video. Get the right ingredients. Save yourself the bother. You got to click one thing, you got to buy it once, and then you forget about it. All right, we're back. It's been about 20 or 30 minutes. Let's see how this dough is doing. So it's still looking pretty shaggy here. We're just going to sprinkle our yeast, sort of try to evenly distribute that all over it. And we're going to do the same with our salt. Now wet your hands with some warm water and just get in there and sort of start folding the dough onto itself. Oh, look at that. You can see that gluten's already developing. Then we're going to do this, and we're going to sort of take this pincer-like motion. What we're trying to do now is get the yeast and the salt evenly distributed into the dough. So we're just mixing it up there, folding it back on itself, and you'll be able to feel the salt and the yeast, and you'll sort of be able to tell when you stop feeling the chunks of it. But you know, just, it's gonna take a minute or two. And I'm starting to feel it less. Just sort of scrape the sides of the bowl, make sure that you don't have any yeast or salt in a big pile lying around there that you missed. And it's starting to stick to my hand now. If you want, you can get your hand wet again. That'll help keep the dough from sticking to it. But other than that, now that's going to look kind of shaggy. And what we're going to do now is we're going to put a towel back over this, and we're going to leave this for, I don't know, 45 minutes or an hour. I think we're going to do one stretch and fold. This is sort of a technique they do with a lot of artisan breads. I don't know if you need to do it. Maybe not. But I'm going to come back in an hour. If you can't come back in an hour, just put this inside a container and let it sit out on your counter. This is going to ferment for about probably 18 hours. If your apartment's very warm, it maybe would be 12 hours. If your apartment's very cold, it might be 24. So yeah, you're just going to want to keep an eye on it. All right, we're back. It's been about 30 or 45 minutes. I don't know. It doesn't matter. We're going to do one stretch and fold here. Again, you don't really have to do it. I don't know if it makes a huge difference. It's something that I do sometimes if I'm around. But if I made the dough and then I had to go somewhere, I wouldn't worry about it. We're going to do just one stretch and fold with some wet hands. And that's just sort of get underneath this dough. You can see this is starting to take shape here. Pull it out, over, turn it, out, over, turn it, out, over. Sort of scoop it onto itself like a ball like this. And that's it. All right, now we're going to take this and we're going to put this in a lightly oiled tub like this. See-through, measurements on the side, nice tight fitting lid. Now, you don't have to have one of these, but you know, this is the advanced video. I would get one. You know, we're just going to scoop that up, put it in here, maybe mix it around so the oil is, you know, kind of over the whole thing. Whatever. And then we're going to stick a lid on this. And now we're just going to let it ride. Now, like I said, could be 12 hours, could be 24. I think it's about 68 degrees in my kitchen right now, and I was using room temperature water, room temperature flour. So we'll see how long this takes to rise. What we're going to look for is when it's like doubled in size and has a kind of a nice dome on top of it. So yeah, I'm just going to leave that out on the counter and we'll check back in later. Okay, we're back. It's been about 13 hours, 12 hours, and I'm looking at this and this looks ready to me. I'm going to try to show you what I'm looking for. We can see the dough has risen here, and maybe I'm going to get this. I'm going to try to show you from above what we want it to look like when it's ready. So here we go. You can see we've got some big bubbles on the top. Now I'm going to come around here and show you. So it's risen here, and you can see some bubbles in the side And if you look underneath, you see a lot of nice bubbles. Now this is ready to use as is. You could just go ahead and shape this and put it in your pans and it would be ready to bake in maybe a few hours. But what we're going to do here to build even more flavor and get an even better texture is I'm just going to put the lid on this and we're just going to stick it in the fridge for like 48 hours. Or just like until you're ready to bake, you know? So that could be 12 hours or 24 hours or whatever, you know, it's going to get cold in there. So when you take it out of the fridge, it is going to take a longer time after you shape it until it's fully proofed and ready to bake. But what I'm going to do is probably put this in the fridge for 48 hours. And then on the morning when I want bread, I'm going to pull it out and I'm going to divide it and shape it. And then, you know, it'll rise throughout the day and it'll be ready by the early evening. All right, so you can see our dough is like super bubbly on top. And I'm going to show you what to look for. You can see all these little holes. I'm not doing a very good job here, but you can see all these little kind of holes throughout the dough. You see a lot of bubbles on top. And now I'm just going to dump it onto my oiled countertop. The nice thing about focaccia is because it's an oily bread, we can just kind of use oil as our like non-stick thing every step of the way. So I just took a paper towel and some oil and put it on my countertop. And now I've dumped all the dough out. Now remember, this is enough for two. So I'm going to split these into two approximately equal, about 600 gram balls. And didn't get quite enough there, so I'm going to cut a little more off until it's... I think this recipe will actually make just slightly under 1,200 grams. So, but if you're in the general range of 600 grams, they're going to be about even. Now, I'm going to take this, I'm going to stretch it out. And then I'm just going to fold it back in on top of itself. And this is just to make a nice little dough ball, which is going to ensure an even focaccia that doesn't have any thin spots in it. And I'm going to do the same with this piece. And you can see it's misshapen and kind of ugly. It doesn't really matter here. And I'm just going to take my bench scraper and get underneath it a few times just to try and get it all mostly into one cohesive mass. I'm going to pull out my Lloyd's pans now. I've slicked these with a little oil. You can see that there. And I'm going to pour a little more oil in. Again, can't have too much oil. Your hands are going to get super dirty when you eat this bread. I just pour a tiny bit. And I'm going to put my dough ball in sort of upside down because I just want a little oil on the top of that, and then I'm going to move it around in that, flip it over. Now we've got oil coating the whole thing, and we're just going to put a lid on that. Oh, you got to get the lids too. You could just put plastic wrap over it. You need to cover it with something or a towel or something. But the lid just makes it so easy. You can stack them. Just get the lid. Here's another one. Gonna do that exact same process. Okay, so now I'm back. This is a couple hours later, and you can see they've risen and started to fill more of the pan. And I'm gonna gently pick up from underneath and try to stretch it out. Gently pick up from underneath. It'll stick just a tiny bit, but if you get under there, it won't really be stuck. So, and I'm gonna just push it down and stretch it out. Try to avoid pressing too hard down because obviously we're trying to build up nice big air pockets in there. And same thing with this one. Just get under there, stretch it. It helps to have wet hands when you're doing this. Make sure you wet your hands with warm water and take care of it like that. You see it's pretty elastic here. It wants to go back. It's not stretching all at once. And that's why I just do this over the course of several hours. It's been a couple more hours. Now let's do that same process. You can see it's even further stretched out in the pan. Again, gently get underneath there. Stretch it to the edges. Gently stretch it to the edges. It's still a little bit elastic, you know. And the way we bake our focaccia is we let the dough tell us when it's ready, you know. The great thing about this, you could probably cook it just like this. It's going to be great. I like to get it a little more stretched out, all the way to the edges. But you know, if it was time for dinner, I would say you can go ahead and bake it like that. You could just skip ahead to topping it with your olive oil and your herbs. And now it's been a little bit more time, and look at that. We've basically filled the whole pan. I'm going to do one last stretch. At this point, I'm going to be preheating my oven. And I'm going to put it to 450. We're going to bake it at 450 for 20 minutes. Everyone's oven is a little different. Some run a little hot, some run a little cold. So you figure that out for you. All right, our oven's preheated. Now we're just going to top these and bake. You can put whatever you want on it. I mean, I'm always going to put salt, and I'm always going to put olive oil. The way I grew up having it was with fresh rosemary on there. You could use dried rosemary. I don't think it's as good. I've got some really nice dried oregano that I've been putting on lately. And I'm just going to, after I sprinkle my salt all over it, I'm just going to sprinkle my oregano all over it. And then when I'm done with that, we're going to put a little olive oil on and kind of spread it around with our hands. And then we're going to dimple the dough. That's beautiful. That is beautiful. Oh, that looks good. Now, I'm trying not to press too much air out, but I'm trying to spread the oil around. And then I'm just dimpling the dough. All right, we're back. It's been 20 minutes. You hear that timer going off? And oh my God, look at these. Look at these. You see that golden color? You will never get that from Whole Foods. I want to puke when I see their focaccia. Look at that. Oh my God. I mean, the bubbles, the caramelization. That's going to be a good focaccia. Now watch this. Watch this. Take that spatula. I just get right underneath there. There's nothing stuck. There's nothing stuck. And that's going to happen every time when you have the Lloyd's pan. And wait until I show you the bottom of this thing. Now I've got a baking steel in my oven, but oh, well, I can't. Oh my God, look at that. So I've got a baking steel in my oven, kind of like a pizza stone. For the focaccia, you could probably get away without it. I think you're still going to get a great crust with the Lloyd's pan. Now let's cut into this. Let's see how we did. Let's see if it's better than Brad and Samin's. I like the sound of that crispiness when we're cutting through. Oh my God, look at that. Now see those bubbles? See the big ones, the small ones, the big air pockets? That is from our long fermentation. You won't get that with your, one day. I'm going to cut into it from the top. Show you what it looks like in there. Oh, that's beautiful.